Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I am Jessica Kim Cohen with Becker's Hospital Review. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation and panel discussion, and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. We are looking forward to hearing your questions. Additionally, in about a week following the webinar, we will be sending you a copy of the presentation to the email you used to register. Sean Lane is a lifelong technologist who grew up in a small rural town in Ohio. He started his career in the U.S. intelligence community, holding leadership positions in the Department of Defense and the National Security Agency. Sean served 5 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan and was awarded the Defense Meritorious Service Medal and the Bronze Star Medal for his service. After government service, Sean started his life as an entrepreneur and has founded several technology companies dealing with big data, advanced analytics, entity resolution, and most recently, artificial intelligence. Sean has raised over $40 million in venture capital and is now a leading expert in applying AI to healthcare. Sean received the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award and an honorary doctorate in recognition of his work. At this time, I am pleased to turn the floor over to Sean to begin today's presentation.
Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for getting on the webinar today. I really appreciate your time, and I'm super excited to walk you through what we call scaling humans with AI. Next slide, please. So just talking a little bit more about my background, as was mentioned, I started my career as an intelligence officer. So I was always a computer hacker from a very early age and was really into technology, but I also wanted to be a spy. So I ended up at the National Security Agency. So for a person who is into technology, that is one of the best places to be. I learned a ton at NSA. We were collecting hundreds of thousands of rows of data every second, very heterogeneous data from different sources. My job was to make sense of all that data, to do advanced analytics, and then put it into a software application or software applications that could be used by the warfighter to find bad guys. It's an incredible experience, really learned a ton about technology. And then I left NSA in 2007 and started my first technology company. So the picture you see here is my kind of war picture. Next slide, please. But even though, you know, I'm carrying a machine gun in that picture or an assault rifle, my real job was really like this. So I sat behind a computer. My real weapon was the computer, you know, really creating technology for the intelligence community and bringing that to bear. Really great experience and really set me up for what we do today. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about scaling humans with artificial intelligence, and I'll begin with really describing what that means. Next slide. So the first question that arises is what is scaling? What does it mean? Well, scaling is essentially doing more with less. You know, businesses scale, human society scales, and it really is the ability to make a bigger impact, to make technology more pervasive, to get more work done, to increase workflow and work productivity without having to increase all the resources. And that's really the idea of scaling. Next slide. So when we think about scaling traditionally, humans have scaled through tools. Next slide. We've scaled through inventions like fire, like the wheel, the printing press. All these things allowed us to do something that we could never do before. Fire gave us the ability to scale where we lived, how we produced food, how we produced power. The wheel allowed us to move farther, allowed us to carry things, allowed us to move goods across large distances. The printing press allowed us to take knowledge out of individual brains and get it out to the rest of the world. It allowed us to spread information. The automobile is another big invention that allowed us to scale and travel even farther distances and even carry more weight and move goods across the world. And then another big scaling technology was the personal computer. It allowed us to automate tasks, it allowed us to be productive, it allowed us to do more work, it allowed us to get more out of a single worker and employee. Next slide, please. So Steve Jobs was pretty famous for telling this story. It was really a story about a report that was done, and the report highlighted different uses of energy and efficiencies in the animal kingdom. It looked at every species, and it said which one can travel the farthest distance with the least amount of energy expended. The condor, which is the picture on the left, won that hands down. So it could travel the farthest with the least amount of energy. The human was actually pretty far down on the list. Using bipedal locomotion, we weren't really very efficient. However, when you gave humans a bicycle, humans were able to travel the farthest, most efficiently, and we beat the condor. And what Steve Jobs liked to say was the computer was the bicycle of the human mind. It was the tool that we used to scale our mind and to accomplish more than we could ever accomplish before. Next slide. So if you look at where AI is today, and we believe AI is the bicycle for humans, the bicycle for work. It allows us to accomplish so much more than we ever could, to go the farthest with the least amount of energy expended. And where we are today is kind of like where we were with computing back in the late 70s, early 80s, where we had this mainframe, this incredible piece of equipment that existed in enterprises and big businesses. It could do something remarkable that not a lot of people understood. Not a lot of people had access to it. Very few people could program on it. But it wasn't really the mainframe that changed the world, that really advanced computing. It was the personal computer. It was when we put a computer on desks of employees at jobs. It was when we put computers in the homes of every person. We gave them the ability to create software, to build software applications, and really democratize computing. That's what changed everything in computing. We think that we're in a similar moment with AI, and it's not really the mainframe versions of AI that's going to make the biggest difference. It's not the most advanced algorithms and the most advanced neural nets. It is the widespread application of AI that can be operational today. Next slide, please. So historically, Alan Turing was one of the really early thought leaders when it comes to AI. And what Turing said was AI was when you were unable to distinguish between a human and technology. And from that, the Turing test has been developed, and the Turing test is a way for you to test whether or not you can tell the difference between a computer and a human. So at Crosschecks, we really adopted this Turing methodology. We believe that AI, as implemented, specifically in healthcare, should be implemented in a way where you can't really tell the difference between your artificial intelligence and a human. Next slide. So with that in mind, and knowing that that's how we approach AI, we really looked at the problem and said, wait a second, if humans use tools to scale, then shouldn't AI use tools too, just like humans? Next slide. So the cool thing about humans is that we have created over the past few decades millions and millions and millions of tools. These tools are known as software applications. We've built apps for smartphones, we've built desktop applications, we've built mainframe systems, we've built electronic medical record systems, we've built revenue cycle tools and marketing tools. We've just built millions of applications. So if we want our AI to be like humans, why not train our AI how to use these tools that already exist? Next slide. We do that through a formula that we've created, and really that formula equates to what we believe AI is and how AI should play in healthcare. That formula starts with this principle or concept called RPA. RPA is robotic process automation. So I used the picture of Johnny number 5 here in the slide, very specifically because it really highlights the eyes of this computer, of this robot. And it's really the advances in computer vision that's been made over the past 5 years that allows RPA to work like it's never worked before. RPA can see a screen, can understand the user interface, know how to click, know how to type, know how to push buttons, know how to work just like a human knows how to use a piece of software. So those computer vision advances has made RPA pretty prolific here recently. Next slide. When thinking about AI, a lot of companies will give you a fancy algorithm, will give you a dynamic neural net or a genetic algorithm. Really these complex artificial intelligence, machine intelligence, and data analytics capabilities that may provide some really interesting insights, but isn't really actionable. So, oftentimes as I'm traveling around talking to hundreds of health systems, they may have engaged an AI company that took all their data, created a data lake, or created a data warehouse, and then provided some insights or some analytics on that data, and they call that AI. And while that is very interesting, and it does incorporate machine intelligence, what it doesn't do is give you the ability to impact workflows, to be part of the day-to-day work that you encounter with healthcare, and to really make that actionable. So I call that the brain in the jar. It's a really nice idea, and it's really powerful, but it doesn't have any way to get implemented. Next slide. We approach it a little differently. We said, what if through robotic process automation, our AI can have access to all the tools that you use today and log in just like a person would? You, with a username and password, get access to an electronic medical record system, a revenue cycle tool, a portal, pretty much any software that exists, and use that software just like your employee would, taking all of that great machine intelligence and putting it to work. Next slide. Given that principle, we think that the user interface is the new API. We've seen, and I've done this a lot in my career, is figure out how to create interoperability between different systems. It was a really big challenge at NSA. I mean, having interoperability between NSA and CIA and FBI, DEA and NGA, and you name it, all the three-letter agencies, was difficult. We spent decades really thinking about how do we homogenize the back end? How do we create a services-oriented architecture? How do we bring all those APIs together to create a backbone that we can use for new applications? And while that's a really interesting idea, and there's a lot of people working on it, the downside of that is once you create that data fabric, once you create that backbone, you still have to introduce new applications. And that just means new user interfaces for your healthcare professionals to look at, another screen, another UI, a web portal they have to log into, something different from just the electronic medical record they had. So with our solution, we decided to really think about using the tools that already exist and turn that user interface into an API. And the user interfaces in many circumstances has way more power and way more availability of features than the API itself. Next slide. So at Crosschecks, we believe in a pretty outlandish kind of idea, one that's a little bit perpendicular to the market. We believe that we should integrate with nothing and we should integrate with everything. Our goal is to be able to use the user interface of every tool, just like a human, but not spend all of our time and precious resources really trying to work through the muck of the APIs in the back end. And we found that we can really deploy things faster, more cheaply, and more successfully just integrating rather than integrating. So the first element of AI is RPA, robotic process automation. Next slide. The next piece of AI, the next part of that equation, is global awareness. So this is really important. When we started Crosschecks, we were dead set on solving this identity problem that existed in healthcare. We saw that every single patient, every provider, every drug had a different unique ID at every place that we went to, a different MRN to identify who they were. We found that healthcare didn't have a global awareness of entities. We didn't know who a person was as they transited from the acute to the ambulatory setting, or from hospital to hospital, or from provider to provider. And we set out to really create an identity resolution capability, which is essentially an entity extraction tool that allowed us to basically build a global unique ID for every person, place, and thing. We've incorporated that idea of global awareness into our AI. So as our artificial intelligence solution is working across different pieces of software, different organizations, different providers, it knows who that patient is, who that doctor is, what that drug is, and builds context in every single software it goes to. This is a really important element and one that's often overlooked in basic automations. Next slide. The third and another important component is the idea of machine intelligence. This goes along a spectrum from basic machine learning algorithms and regressions to the more advanced dynamic neural networks. What we like to do with our artificial intelligence solution is train it how to make decisions similar to a human. If we have the data that shows how a human has taken raw information and made a determination based on that raw information, we can use that data to train our AI through neural nets to make very similar determinations. Really, all the work that your human workforce has been doing for for the past 10 to 20 years that's been digitally recorded is a training ground for AI. And we use that data to make very accurate, very precise determinations using neural networks. And we use a vast array of neural networks, everything from kind of deep feed-forward neural networks all the way to the more dynamic neural networks and genetic algorithm-built networks. Next slide. So wrapping that all up and putting that together, RPA, robotic process automation, plus global awareness, so understanding an entity across contexts, plus machine intelligence to us at Crosschecks equals AI. One by themselves doesn't quite do it, but the combination of all three really gives you an intelligent automation employee that can go in, make decisions, do work, and understand the patient's context across different pieces of software. Next slide. So that's a special kind of bot that can do those things, and we've created a name for that bot. We call it a skill bot. So a skill bot is really the general description of what we're building. So it's a super connected, intelligent learning bot. Super connected in the sense that over time these bots are able to communicate with each other. They're able to send information from one bot to the next and really be connected, creating this internet of healthcare that doesn't exist today. That's much different than just building a bot to do a simple screen scrape at a single location. The intelligent part is that it can make very complex decisions, and it can do that based on the use of data to create neural nets and other machine learning techniques in order to make these decisions. And then the learning part is it's able to learn as it goes. It can see where it's making the better decisions and where it needs to adjust and make those adjustments. Next slide. So our skill bot, the one that we've built at Crosschecks, is called Olive. Olive is what we like to say your newest employee. Olive works at your health system just like any other employee, takes on tasks, automates those tasks, and really gives you the opportunity to scale your human workforce. Next slide. So another edgy type thing that we say is that Olive uses all the crappy software you already have. We found that so many startups, so many really awesome tech companies that were coming out of the coast and all over the country were trying to create these software user interfaces and sell them into healthcare. They thought that their sexy UI was the next greatest thing, and they wanted healthcare systems to adopt their software. And we find that that's just not a non-starter. It's really a not very inventive solution to go to someone and say, we know that this only does 2 to 3% of all the work that you need to do, but we want you to log into another screen. We want you to have another window up. And as I traveled around, I noticed the screens of a lot of administrative employees, and there were dozens of applications loaded. And I thought, this is not something that we should be proud of as a tech industry. So what we decided to do was use all the software you already have, not try to get customers to download new software apps, to use a new user interface or log into a new portal. We wanted Olive just to use everything that you already have invested in. Next slide. So I'm going to go through some common use cases, but first I'm going to frame kind of the ways that Olive can work. Next slide. So really Olive works in two different ways. The first is this concept called Olive Works. Olive Works is a set of pre-packaged automation tasks that we've tried and tested and they're tried and true that we've used at several health systems around the country. These are things like checking insurance eligibility, doing prior authorization, and checking claim statuses. There's a whole menu of things that Olive has done and can do that come pretty pre-packaged with very understandable pricing that you can adopt right now and have it start creating optimizations and scale your humans inside your organization. The second way to engage Olive is what we call Olive Labs. This is when your organization has decided, you know what, AI is going to be part of our transformation. We know it's the future and we want to invest in it, kind of like an infrastructure. Olive Labs is based on what we call kilowatt hour pricing model. A kilowatt hour works a lot like a kilowatt hour of electricity. We go through your organization with you, find things for Olive to do, sometimes very custom. We build those capabilities, and then Olive starts to consume those kilowatt hours. So I'm going to give you two quick use cases of how Olive has used both Olive Works and Olive Labs to make a difference. Next slide. So in the Olive Works category, we have a great customer partner called Hancock Regional Medical Center in Indiana. It's an incredible customer of ours that was an early adopter of Olive. It's a 111-bed hospital. The important thing here is to point out that AI is for everyone. It's not just for the 20 health systems that everybody thinks about. It's for all the 5,000 health systems in the country. So at Hancock, we use Olive to do a couple different things. One is post-visit insurance eligibility checks. The other is prescription prior authorizations. So Olive automates Meditech, Availity, Meditech Web, and SureScript's Complete EPA to do these automations. For the prior authorization example, Olive actually sits on the fax machine, checks every fax that comes in, determines whether or not it's a prior auth. If it is, Olive takes that prior authorization, looks up the patient's information in the EHR, fills out the prior authorization request in QuickStart to the provider, and submits that prior auth with a human not even having to be in the loop. It's an incredible way to give time back to your employees and a very efficient way to do prior authorizations. With the insurance eligibility use case, Olive is looking at those patients who may have been moved to self-pay, but actually had coverage during that time. Olive works to make sure that we verify that your patients that had insurance during the moment of care, the time of care, you're able to make a claim and get paid for that. We see that all too often it happens that somebody comes to get care from your facility and then you don't get paid for it because there wasn't an appropriate insurance eligibility that was done during that process. Next slide. The next example is Olive Labs. In this Olive Labs example, we partnered with a large third-party administrator who does subrogation valuations. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's, for example, if you get hit by, in a car accident and it was the other driver's fault, and let's say they have Medicaid and you have Anthem, Medicaid should be paying for your hospital bills, not Anthem. So humans have to do a subrogation and do a valuation where they will look at the entire episode of care that's revolving around that car accident and determine the claims that are part of the car accident, which ones aren't. Value the claim and then seek reimbursement from the appropriate insurance company. A very human-intensive process. The good news is that humans have been doing this for years at this organization. So we were able to take all the data for years of work and train a neural net to basically make the same decisions that a human would on whether or not those claims had anything to do with that car accident and go through the rest of the process of getting the reimbursement. So a very custom use of neural nets and more advanced machine intelligence, and that's an example of Olive Labs. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the future and why this is different. Olive is more than just an RPA tool. Olive is more than just a bot. Olive is actually a gateway to what we consider the Internet of Healthcare. And let me explain how that works. Next slide. Imagine in your healthcare system, Olive was logged in to a hospital's acute EMR and maybe your outpatient ambulatory EMR, and you needed to work across both systems. Olive has the ability to communicate with herself across these different systems, transfer information about a patient, make sure that everything is done along a continuity of care, and ensure that no matter what system they're in and which MRN they're using, that it all contributes to the same patient. Next slide. Now imagine that same idea across many healthcare organizations. In the future, at Crosschecks, we intend to have Olive-to-Olive communications. This will allow Olive to share information with other Olive instantiations in different healthcare organizations. So, for example, Olive could pass a continuity of care document to another Olive at a different hospital. Olive could send a referral. Olive could work a prior authorization, send information that would typically be done through a fax machine. So Olive is really a router that we're putting on this network. And these Olive routers will create this Internet of Healthcare over time. Next slide. So what does that mean? How does that impact the patient? So I'm going to tell a story about this guy. So this guy, he's on his way to Aspen, Colorado. He needs to deliver a briefcase to Mary Swanson, but he has this pretty noticeable chip in his tooth. So he stops in, let's say, Wisconsin to get this chipped tooth fixed. And he doesn't really know anything about the dentist in Wisconsin. So he texts Olive and says, Olive, I really need to go to the dentist to get a chipped tooth fixed. Olive then knows who the person is. She knows the insurance information of that patient. She knows she is logged in to all the dental practices around the area. She can see the open schedules. She can offer this patient a open scheduled time, let's say Wednesday at 10 o'clock. The patient accepts that time. Olive then schedules it directly in the system. She then moves all the relevant information about that patient to that facility, all their past records, their past imaging, their insurance information, all the stuff that would be in that pesky clipboard that we fill out every time we go to a doctor's office. So that's the future of what Olive can provide when Olive is the router in this larger network. Next slide. Another thing that's interesting is, there's this company called Google that everyone has heard of. This is one of their earliest user interfaces. And Google has done a really interesting job at organizing the world's data. That's kind of their mission, and that's how we think about them. And they truly have. As we want to know anything, we search it, we type it into Google, we can find out information about nearly everything. But there's one huge area that Google has missed, and that is the enterprise. Google doesn't make the enterprise searchable for security reasons, for privacy reasons. This enterprise data isn't really searchable, especially in healthcare. So imagine a world, next slide, imagine a world where Olive is logged in to thousands of EMRs, thousands of practice management systems across all of healthcare. And you want to know, Olive, has anyone ever seen this rare genetic disease before? I have a child that I'm caring for with a brain defect, and I don't know how to treat it because I've never seen it. But I want to know, has any other doctor seen this? Has it ever been presented before? Imagine if you could just query Olive, and then Olive turns and in a federated model queries that specific information in every single system across all of healthcare and returns back, yes, in fact, we have seen this genetic abnormality at these 14 locations. Contact this doctor to find out how they treated it. Imagine what we could do with the ability to search across every single system to help treat patients. So that's a little bit of a taste into the future and kind of the way we see Olive progressing. But it starts with just putting Olive to work inside your organization like an employee, scaling your human workforce, getting better productivity, making more margins than you ever have before. That's where we want to start. So I'm going to open it up to questions. Next slide. And before I do so, I want to point out that if you do want more information about Olive, we would love for you to go to hireolive.com to get more information, or just email olive@crosschecks.com. You can also email me, Sean@crosschecks.com. That's SEAN @crosschecks.com. But thank you for listening, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Sean, for that fantastic presentation. We will now begin today's question and answer session. Please submit any questions you have by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. We will try to get through as many questions as we have time for. Our first question is, you mentioned the idea of outegration. What do you mean by that?
That's a great question. So we kind of termed that phrase, we coined it. But outegration is this idea that you can still get at the data, you can still create interoperability without having to trudge through these back-end API layers, paying consultants to do the work to wrangle HL7 or wrangle Fire or whatever that may be in the back end to really have this interoperability. The idea of outegration is that there is an API that's always been developed for every piece of software. We've just called it the UI. And if we can use the UI like a human, through the advances in computer vision and AI in general, then we can outegrate with everything. And every single software is open to this. And it doesn't require any extra work or building APIs. So we say that it's a better move to outegrate with everything than to integrate with anything.
Thanks so much for clarifying that. Our next question is, what is the right size institution where you see AI successfully being deployed?
At CrossChecks, we've been around for almost 6 years now, and I've spent a lot of my time, as well as my folks here, going around to many, many organizations across the country of all sizes, 25-bed, federally qualified health centers to bigger organizations with hundreds of beds and many, many facilities. And really, it's right sized for anyone. We didn't want to make this a out of reach AI solution just for the biggest players. We wanted to create equity around this, where anyone could have access to this AI capability. We believe that it's narrow AI used widely that's going to make the biggest difference. And frankly, a lot of the regional health systems around the country, they're so important to healthcare delivery. It's where healthcare happens in a lot of cases. It is potentially the largest employer in these towns. It's a very important thing for them to stay alive. And oftentimes they're challenged with margins. They're barely break even, maybe even upside down. We want to give them a way to help them continue to deliver care more efficiently, more operationally efficiently, and give better care to their patients. And we think Olive's going to help do that. So we're just as excited about putting Olive in a 50-bed hospital in a rural area as we are putting it in a 500-bed hospital that has 47 locations. So it really is across the board. And given the two ways that you can engage Olive, through Olive Works or Olive Labs, it really creates this opportunity, no matter how big you are, to get started, whether it's starting with a kind of prepackaged eligibility solution or thinking of Olive as part of your transformation and really, investing in changing the way you do work across the board and making AI an infrastructure. So it's really suited for really anywhere along that spectrum.
Thanks so much. That's really helpful for understanding. What are some of the prerequisites to implementing AI specifically for Olive?
So there aren't a ton of prerequisites. I mean, we need to make sure that there's software that you use today. We like to see tasks that should be automated. So anything at high volumes or high velocities that your humans are doing right now, those make good candidates for things for Olive to do. But unlike a lot of technology implementations, this isn't a big IT lift. There's no integration involved. It's simply a username and password. So what we like to do on our side is, once you contact us, we have our team kind of scope out what you have in mind for Olive to do. That either matrix really nicely to a prepackaged Olive Works product, or in an Olive Labs scenario, and then we get started. There aren't really any prerequisites other than an appetite to kind of start working with AI inside your organization, and you're using some kind of software today.
Great. And building on that question, our next question is, what is the magnitude of investment required to start adopting AI in our organization?
Yeah, so typically it depends on the use case, the volume of that use case, and how big your organization is. It kind of ranges from $40,000 a year. In kind of our center mass is around $200,000 a year. And so the $40,000 a year kind of general area is usually to take on a particular function, to use one of the prepackaged Olive Works capabilities at a kind of mid-size health system. The kind of middle ground $200,000 point is either a high volume, larger health system doing some of the prepackaged tasks, or even starting around the Olive Labs concept to do custom automations. But it varies, and we've gone up to 2 million. We've gone down as far as in the 30s or 40s. So it's a wide spectrum, and really we try to right size it for your organization. But there's no job too small. There's no job too big. Because we really have a lot of value in that network effect that I talked about at the end. We want everybody kind of to use Olive so that we do get the benefit of that network over time.
Thanks so much for clarifying that. And our next question asks, you mentioned robotic processing automation. Is that a type of artificial intelligence?
So I think RPA is certainly an enabler to AI. Sometimes it's bucketed with AI, sometimes it isn't. I like to think that, as that formula kind of laid out, that RPA coupled with machine intelligence and global awareness acts as the hands to that brain in the jar, Like I showed a picture of that brain in the jar. That's the really exciting machine intelligence algorithms that provide insights. But RPA provides the hands. It allows that brain in the jar to actually become part of your workflow and to action a lot of those insights that it may be deriving. So I think coupled with machine intelligence and global awareness, RPA is an essential part of AI. I think on its own, it's an interesting technology, but just like machine learning on its own, it's not quite AI.
Great. Thanks so much for going over that. Our next question is, what areas of a hospital are ripe for artificial intelligence?
We've seen the most, very acute demand in revenue cycle. Honestly, that's where we see a lot of the urgent need for all of, and a lot of it's because there's only so many hours in a day. There's only so many staff members, and unfortunately, they have a list of 100 things they need to get done, and they're only able to get 10 or 20 of those things. And we want them to give them the time and the opportunity to get lower down on that list of things they need to do. And Olive really opens that up. The other thing that's great about Olive is she doesn't miss anything. She works every day. She works 24/7. She doesn't do a task differently every single time. So when it comes to things where there's not really a lot of room for error, like revenue cycle, Olive's perfect candidate for it. So whether be in the billing world or the patient engagement post billing to recover funds, or it has to do with claim status checking or eligibility, those are places that are well suited for Olive. They're high volume. There's not a lot of room for error, and frankly, it just frees up your staff to go down further on that list and do things they've always wanted to do but never had the time.
That's a great point. Thanks so much. This next audience member asks, what systems do you interface with, and do you interface with Epic?
So we are able to use any software, and it is dependent on, as long as we have login credentials to that software, there's really no software out there that we can't use because of the way we interface with it. We have several customers that we're in the process of implementing who do have Epic. We have several customers who are either implemented or in the process of implemented with Meditech. That's a very common one for us. We really enjoy working with Meditech because we've done the most training as far as Olive goes on the Meditech system. Cerner is another commonly used one, but really there's no system that we can't operate within. Just like a human, if you can train a human to use it, you can train Olive to use it. The only thing we need is a username and password. So as long as we get those credentials, we can work on any system.
Great. Thanks so much for that great question from the audience and informative response. And this next audience member asks, how would we know that Olive is doing what she's, quote, supposed to be doing?
Yeah, it's a great question. We are very careful to make sure that Olive doesn't start working autonomously without being shadowed first by a human. We really want the human workers to have the opportunity to audit Olive's performance similar to how they would a new employee as Olive is learning to do the job right. And we have a series of check rides, I would say is what we would call them, where Olive is doing some work and then being checked to make sure that she's doing it correctly throughout the implementation process. It really comes down to comfortability with the customer. Some customers get a very quick sense of Olive's capabilities and are very comfortable having her work autonomously. Some take a little longer, just depending on the complexity of the task. But we work with the customer to ensure that they're completely comfortable. But we also, it doesn't stop once you've said, you think Olive's doing a good job. It doesn't stop there. I mean, there's auditing capabilities built in, so you can see what Olive is doing. Olive reports very frequently on the work that she has performed. She's updating you on what she's done, exactly how she did it, and any kind of edge cases that may not have happened as it would be normal. So there's a process that we go through to make sure that you're comfortable. But again, it is dependent on the workflow.
Thanks for pointing that out. Our next question asks, what if a workflow changes?
Yeah, and so the cool thing about Olive Works and Olive Labs is they're both what we call artificial intelligence as a service. This is a really unique thing that we offer. We're not just handing you a bot and saying good luck. We're not just handing you software and saying, go build a bot, good luck. We are actually implementing this bot, Olive, to do the work, and we want to achieve your desired effect. So if your desired effect is to make sure that patients come through who had insurance, that you have that information to build them successfully, then that's what we work towards. So if your workflow changes, if your software changes, if your business processes change, we change with you. It's our responsibility to make sure all of it is working, and that's part of this AI as a service model. We know that there's a lot of IT requirements already levied on these healthcare organizations. We don't want to levy another one. We don't want to create a system that requires a lot of maintenance and support from your folks. We take that on. We bear that burden. That's part of our model.
Thanks so much for going over that. Our next question was hoping you could speak a bit to what are some of the IT requirements to using Olive.
Yeah, usually it's just getting access to the system via VPN or kind of like a remote desktop, and we'll need a virtual environment. So we like to have a virtual server set up that has a workstation installed on it, and then we will have username and password, so credentials to whatever system that you need. So really it's a connection to your network so that we can set up our workstation, and then the credentials we need for the actual software that Olive will be working within. And those are really the only two IT requirements that we have.
Great, thanks so much. And our next question is, how do we know Olive is protecting patient information?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we take PHI extremely seriously, and we have since the very beginning of CrossChecks. I come from a background of protecting the world's most precious information. When I've worked in top secret information for most of my life. And when I went into healthcare, a lot of people said, well, what about HIPAA? And as we started to learn about, the laws and requirements around healthcare data, I was actually surprised that the requirements weren't stricter than they were. So we like to go above and beyond the lowest level requirements. We like to exceed those expectations with our security. We believe very strongly in that. So we've put a lot of resources into making sure that everything is secure and protected. We're happy to go through the security audits that may be required in order for us to get up and running. Likewise, we like to make sure that our partners follow the right security requirements so that we're not exposing ourselves to undue risk at the same time. So we take that very seriously. We follow all the requirements. In fact, we exceed those, and we're happy to kind of show our work as it pertains to that.
Our next question is about robotic processing. What makes Olive AI different than traditional RPA?
Yeah, I mean, going back to what I talked about a lot in the presentation. I mean, traditional RPA allows you to automate a piece of software. It's the RPA plus the global awareness plus the machine intelligence built in that creates really the AI formula. So it's the combination of things on top of just your traditional RPA that makes Olive unique. RPA is simply a tool that Olive uses for integrations, but some of the more complex things that Olive does requires the use of neural nets or machine learning algorithms to complete those, and it's really a combination of all those things that make Olive super unique. Again, RPA is a good part of the equation, but definitely not the whole equation.
Thanks so much for clarifying that. For our next question, an audience member is asking if you can kind of compare and contrast Olive with Watson.
Yeah, I think Watson is a very machine intelligence focused solution from what I understand. And again, I don't work at IBM, and I only kind of understand from the periphery. Very focused in machine intelligence. I'm sure has incredible capabilities. The difference with Olive is that Olive is more operational intelligence, focused on administrative tasks primarily, that has that RPA as hands to get to work immediately. So, Olive can start working on your workflow today, replace a lot of the, work that's been done on high volume repetitive tasks, create operational efficiencies. It's not just purely a machine intelligence driven type of solution that provides insights and analytics. So that's the biggest difference. We like to call Olive blue collar AI, whereas we would think of Watson as maybe white collar AI. Olive is your workhorse.
That's a great point. Thank you. Our next question is, do you have standard data specs for the historical information needed to populate the machine intelligence?
Not really. Because all the data sets are so heterogeneous, we just adopt our models to be able to ingest those data sets. So as we're working with different data, we have to put it through an ETL process that allows us to really bring in just a huge varying degree of data from all these different sources. So it could be that the data that you have was never intended to be used for machine intelligence. So we have to kind of massage that data and bring it into our neural nets and do feature engineering around that. But that's part of our process. That's kind of standard when it comes to creating these neural nets, is to make sure that the data can be put into the algorithms. So that's work that we would do on our side. So we don't kind of require that you put it in any special format.
Thank you for clarifying that. Our next question asks, what are the canned RPA solutions that you offer?
So we have several, and I think you could go into hireolive.com, you get more information, and speaking to one of our sales representatives, because it's ever evolving. But the three that we focus on primarily is Olive Authorizes, which is Olive doing prior authorization, Olive Verifies, which is Olive doing our kind of any work in insurance eligibility, pre or post visit, and then Olive Updates, which is Olive working in claim statuses and other things like that. But we actually have a list of many more. Those are the three hottest and the ones that kind of are used most often. And again, that's evolving. That menu kind of grows. Sometimes we'll have somebody do something in Olive Labs that we determine is something that we could package and more people could have access to it. So, for the most up-to-date list, I would say definitely contact us and to get, a full menu of prepackaged Olive Works capabilities. But those three, Olive Verifies, Olive Authorizes, and Olive Updates, are the most commonly used.
Great, thanks for pointing that out. And for our next question, an audience member would like to know, how many healthcare institutions or health systems have you worked with?
So right now, Olive has been hired by about 70 organizations. But in our past, we've worked with a couple hundred organizations in varying levels of our product. But for Olive specifically, about 70 organizations have hired Olive.
Great. Our next question asks, what sort of reporting is available to inform us of Olive's success and key performance indicators?
Yeah, so we think about the Turing model, and we want Olive to be as much like a human as possible. So what we've done is we've given Olive the ability to report her KPIs and what the work that she's done through the same medium that your employees would use. So email, so Olive sends emails, Olive can chat, but we also have a dashboard that we give every customer. And that dashboard talks about all the work Olive has done, how many hours she's worked, the ROI, and we are working on, this is kind of in skunkworks, but we're working on an Alexa skill, and where you can basically ask Amazon Alexa to give you your Olive briefing, and then Olive runs through her daily KPIs and what she's done for your organization. So different types of reporting streams, email, chat, and dashboard, and then voice with Alexa.
Thanks so much for going over that. Our next question that we have is, how do you gather data for Olive's machine learning?
So we work with the organization ahead of time. So if we're engaged in an Olive Labs work engagement, we will start with identifying the data that we may need to create a neural net to do the very specific job that we're doing. So it may be just getting it through FTP. We could, get it through by having an instantiation of a server on inside your local area network and transfer the data to that. But we will identify first the data that's needed, and then we'll figure out the best way to transfer that data. Sometimes we're talking about gigabytes of data, so we think about that as well. How to best transfer that efficiently. And there's sometimes inferencing needs to be made, meaning we need to teach the algorithm more than just once. We'll have to maybe teach it weekly or monthly or yearly. And that in those kind of arrangements, we like to make sure there's a steady stream of data coming from the system. So we'll work with the organization to best fit how that gets transferred.
Great, thank you so much, Sean. Our next audience member is hoping that you could explain a bit about AI as a service and what makes that different than other models.
Yeah, great question. So we, when we started to concept Olive and put Olive into the market, we thought about how we should approach it. And we saw that there were a lot of tools that were being built so that people could do RPA. And we saw that those tools, you could buy the tool and buy the license and then hire a consultant to come in and build a solution on top of the tool and then pay for maintenance and support and anytime anything broke, and then maybe have people inside your organization that also built on the tool. And we thought, like, in healthcare, where the primary objective is to care for the patient, why can't we deliver everything? So we think of AI as a service as just getting the AI and not buying all the piece parts. So you're literally getting Olive to do whatever function you need Olive to do, and we take care of the engineering, the support, the maintenance, everything in the background. To my knowledge, we're very unique in that way. Nobody's really providing AI as a service. Many people are providing components that you can purchase and consultants that you can hire on top of those components to kind of build your own solution. We didn't want you to have to build your own solution. We wanted to just provide you the AI you need to make a big impact immediately.
Great, thank you so much. Our next question asks whether hospital leadership or staff are worried about losing jobs.
Yeah, this is an important discussion. This is an important discussion not only with Olive, but just in society today. I think that the way we like to frame this is Olive is there to scale humans. Olive's job is to make the quality of life of your nurses, of your doctors, of your administrators better, to take some of that. We like to say Olive takes the robot out of the human. If we can give a better quality of life to healthcare workers today through Olive, then that's what our goal is. And we want healthcare organizations to be able to use their current human capital in better ways to accomplish tasks that they've never been able to accomplish before. We are a long way away from replacing humans. And I think we're trying to replace what humans do today, but we're not trying to replace humans. Our goal is to scale humans to get more out of your workforce. So I think as long as we keep that message consistent and we make sure that that's what we're truly about, then I think we can avoid a lot of the challenges that come with that. But just broadly, that's something that is a conversation that's happening in many industries, and one that kind of collectively we need to figure out what that means for us as a human race as we scale.
That's a great point. Thanks so much for clarifying that. It looks like we have time for about one more question. Our next question is, what do you think is the future of AI?
Well, it's a pretty broad question, but I would say I think that artificial intelligence is our next big scaling moment. It is the thing that is going to allow the human race to do more than it's ever done before. Those things may be, moonshots like occupying Mars, or coming up with a new sustainable energy platform, or curing cancer, or extending life expectancy. If we want to do any of those kind of moonshot ideas and actually achieve it, then we have to scale ourselves as humans. And AI, I think, is that next scaling technology much like the internet was, or the personal computer was, or the combustion engine. So I see it. I see the future as very bright for artificial intelligence. Healthcare deserves and needs artificial intelligence probably most acutely. We think and this is a bold thing that we say internally here at Crosschecks, but we think we could carve $1 trillion out of the cost of healthcare with the proper implementation of artificial intelligence. That could change everything. That could lead investments into new drugs or new treatment methodologies, better care, more pervasively. It could really make a big impact in extending life expectancy. These are things that aren't small. So it may start with a small project to automate your insurance eligibility, but what it leads to is pretty remarkable. I think it'll start with these operational tasks, but eventually it will get into clinical tasks too. And that's something we'll have to figure out how to navigate.
Great, thank you so much. And I'd like to thank Sean for his excellent presentation, and to our audience for participating today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to having you join us for future webinars.